Hello and welcome to Postgres FM, episode number 1. I'm Michael.
Pilot episode.
Pilot episode.
Right.
Or trailer. Yeah.
Right.
Should I just start again?
Keep it. It's good.
I like it. All right. I'm Michael. I'm from PG Mustard, and I'm joined today by Nikolai.
Nikolai Samokhvalov. Don't try my last name unless you have Russian or Ukrainian roots or Belarusian roots. So yes, I'm Nikolai from Postgres AI.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this, and looking forward to these. So I think we're going to start with a topic on what is a slow query. You brought this one.
Let's first discuss why we do it, right?
Yeah, let's do that.
Because I felt so long that we should have some podcast, pure podcast without any screencasting or slides and so on, because it's also a good format to have some discussion. And I also I feel a lack of I think meetups died. Meetups died because of COVID. They started to die before COVID, but COVID finished them completely. So it's very hard to meet at some place and have some pizza and beer and just. I mean, people still do it, but only 10 persons come and so on. It's not working well. So we need more formats. I know many people hate purely online formats, but I actually love them, and I think we should experiment with more and more styles of formats. And the Postgres community needs some podcast. That's why we discussed with Michael, and we should start Postgres FM probably, right? Maybe it will die also, but who knows, right? But I hope not. Right?
Yeah.
Why do you do it? Why do you do it?
Yeah, well, I love podcasts in general. I love them for learning. I find them really helpful. I can listen to them at times where I can't watch a video or I can't attend an event. I find them really helpful in terms of learning, but also getting to know people in the community, getting to see different guests, getting to hear interesting conversations between people that I probably wouldn't be a part of generally. So I love them as kind of an insight into something that you're not necessarily familiar with already, or a way of keeping up with people that you don't talk to all the time. That's quite a nice format as well. But yeah, basically thought it would be interesting. I thought I would like to listen to this, right? I would like to listen to a couple of people talking about Postgres each week, or discussing something that is super interesting or controversial or not yet decided, or a common issue that people see all the time, something that I've just hit or might be able to avoid hitting in future. That kind of thing.
Right, the same. I'm just sometimes trying to fill gaps when I walk my dog, or I'm in an airplane. Just I have some time and I want to not just some entertainment, but something useful. And podcasts is great for this kind of gaps to fill, right? So, yeah, okay. Let's start with some topics we have. I think we in general we will try to talk more about performance, but maybe not only, right? But definitely about Postgres.
Yeah, I think always
as
about
name
Postgres.
Suggests.
I think based on what we focus on, it will we probably will end up bringing performance topics more than most would. But equally, I think we're open to suggestions from other people as well as to what you'd be interested in hearing about. So yeah, we're very open on the topics front. But,
my opinion about performance, it was a surprise to me, but I think not everyone is interested in performance. Not every engineer who writes a SQL is interested in performance. This is the discovery I made. It feels like the most interesting part, scalability, performance, these kinds of topics. But I found many people not just interested; they just need some query to work and return proper results, and that's it. So, I hope more. I wish everyone to be interested in performance. But okay. Anyway, let's start with the first topic.
I'm interested in that one actually. What do you find there's a pattern as to who cares and who doesn't care so much, or is it that they only care if it's below a certain threshold, or is it that they care about one thing way more? Is it everyone says they care about
Right.
performance to some level, but what would they prioritize it over?
I think we're moving towards one of the topics we wanted to
Yeah.
discuss, and the word threshold is good here. So what I observe in organizations from small startups that grow very fast, like several times, all numbers increase several times per year, or very large organizations with thousands of people and hundreds of engineers, I observe quite good pattern, not good, obvious pattern, when business dictates feature delivery to be very fast, like a lot of competitors around, so requirements are very strict, so we need to move fast. So developers mostly interested in having features delivered like daily, for example, right? So very, very fast, move very fast. And under this pressure, they don't have time to have the best performance ever, right? They don't have they just don't have time. So they start to move okay, it works, let's go. But the problem is, who defines this threshold? Where is the minimum, and who checks it? How to check it? It's usually a problem. So sometimes you observe very good performance when you develop the feature, but when you deploy it, it's not good. Or you deploy it also good, but 1 year later, nobody touched this code. It left unoptimized. You have more data, and the query degrades and already feels not good. So my threshold, I have my threshold. I wrote an article about it. So it's like every web page should be faster than 200, 300 milliseconds. 1 second is absolute maximum. And since we consider page or API request, of course, and since every page or API request may consist of multiple queries, SQL queries, it may have 0 if everything is cached, of course. It's obvious. But sometimes we have dozens of queries. It's not good. Sometimes we have a loop with queries. Of course, it's not good. But in general, it means that if we have a requirement for a web page to be not longer than 1 second, it means that general requirement for SQL to be not longer than dozens of milliseconds. All right. So to keep and also my article also describes this, where this number comes from. Where does it come from? Human perception. It's 200 milliseconds reaction of any human, plus minus 50 maybe. So if you press some button, you expect reaction below 200 milliseconds, better 100 milliseconds.
Yeah, I think I've heard,
right?
Is it below 100 milliseconds, it feels instantaneous. Anything above that,
right,
we perceive some delay, even if it's not instant. Yeah. So I know exactly where you're coming from, and that makes a lot of sense. So I guess the question is, do you see a lot of companies that generally have way worse than that performance and still don't care?
Of course. Well, yes, a lot. So, I mean, if users don't complain, oftentimes we just don't care. We have some functionality, it's working, but we have so many things to create, to compete with others, right? To expand, to grow. So if users don't complain, sometimes you see some pages or API requests are above 1 second in duration, and nobody cares. You can see it from logs. Actually, you can check if you have, for example, log migration statement above something. You can see queries. Any big project usually have a lot of queries coming that are executed longer than 1 second, for example. And here we can discuss all percentiles, right? So not only every query should be below 1 second or below 100 milliseconds. We say 99% should be below, right? So any big project should talk in these terms. But sometimes we have a lot of slow queries, and nobody cares until big feedback loop works. Big feedback loop is when a lot of users start to complain, and management understands it's a big problem. And from top, right? So
or churn even, right? Like sometimes people aren't, you hear some users complain, but you realize that it's the ones that are churning that are the ones complaining. They're the ones that are
right. Well,
it's real dollars that are being affected. Or e-commerce, maybe your conversion rate on the pages that are slower.
E-commerce knows how to measure every second of downtime, or at least minute of downtime. So yes. Degradation is tricky in terms of how to measure it in dollars, but also maybe it's possible. I think it's possible.
Yeah, we see the same.
But again, if you check slow query log, usually a lot of things are happening. I mean, in a large company or a large project, a lot of bad things. I mean, if you have luxury to get a few weeks for optimization, there is always in a large project to fill them with optimization, right? But it's a decision from management. Let's optimize and be prepared for further growth.
Yeah. So I've seen some exceptions that I think you're probably, I've read your post and I think it's great. I think you're probably accounting for them because they probably fall a little bit into the analytical workloads, but some applications almost do analytics as OLTP, so they might be an analytics product. And if they let you set a few filters and it takes a few seconds to load, sometimes that's acceptable from a user, but that seems like they seem like the exceptions where the user understands that it's doing something complicated or data heavy behind the scenes. And if they're waiting for that on a one-off basis and it's only a few seconds, they seem okay with it. But yeah, I think that's probably only at the exceptions.
Some complex search, it may be okay, but usually the question is what will happen in a few years when we will have a lot of data, much more data than today. If today we have 10 terabytes, in a few years we might have 50 terabytes. What will happen? Yeah. So if it takes 3 seconds today, it may be already above 10 seconds in future. And of course, people usually are okay to wait a second or two during performing a search, from my opinion, but still not good. We should optimize.
And the examples I've seen where you mentioned people scaling and having problems there, sometimes these startups, they bring on a customer who has 3-4 times more data than all of their other customers combined. When they're in an early phase, that's not that unusual. And if they haven't tested, sometimes performance drops off a cliff or something goes badly wrong. We've seen that a few times. So it's super interesting to think of planning ahead, but most companies don't seem to, because as you say, that it has to be a focus on feature delivery, and investors need updates, and customers want certain things delivered in certain time frames, that kind of thing. So what can we do? What can we do to help people?
Well, first thing to define some thresholds, as you said. Maybe it can be defined in form of if some SREs are involved, they have some methodologies to control uptime and so on. So similar approach can be applied here. Like we can say we have good quality if, for example, 99% of all queries are below 100 milliseconds. We define it in form of SLO, service level objective. And we start monitoring it. We start having alerts if it goes down. We perform also, second thing, we perform from time to time, like at least once per quarter, we perform analysis of current situation, and also we try to predict future. So like some capacity planning. Are we okay with numbers growing that we observe, or we predict our thresholds to be broken already in next quarter? So this is like usual approach to growing project, and then we should of course go down and perform query analysis and optimization, analyzing whole workload. But it's a whole different topic. Probably we should discuss it separately.
Yeah, but the slow query logs a great way of getting started, right? The logmin duration statement. If people don't have that turned on, that feels really sensible for pretty much everybody. I've seen startups that don't do any monitoring yet. They don't do any performance monitoring. So the idea of even getting the 99th percentile might be a stretch. But if you just start logging the absolute worst queries,
Yeah, I saw this. So what I describe is for larger organizations.
Yes.
So like it's already sound like some bureaucracy involved,
Yeah.
right? So some processes, but it works. In larger organization, we need to do a little bit more complex process to be established. But if it's a small startup, a few engineers only, I saw this. CTO with a couple of engineers, very small startup. By the way, it was very successful and sold recently to a very large company, very successful. But in the beginning, like 3 or 4 years ago, I saw them, CTO, having every query that went to Postgres log because of log mean duration statement, 500 milliseconds or so. It was sent to Slack. An immediate reaction. So they try to achieve zero events for this. In the beginning, it's fine, but this process doesn't scale well. At some point, you will be overwhelmed, of course. But in the beginning, it's good. It's like you react to every occurrence of slow query. Right.
Hence focusing on.
So we have 2 recipes already. Good.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to cover on this one?
Well, not at this point, I think. It's enough for about slow queries. Maybe we can talk about slow transactions because it's quite a different topic. Related but different, right?
Yeah, go for it.
So we here you discussed analytical workloads, but looks like we mostly discuss OLTP workloads for, it means like web and mobile apps. So if we talk about transactions, we should understand like there is query, transaction, and sessions, 3 levels. To execute a query, you need to have a transaction. Even if you don't define it, it will be defined automatically. A single query, it's like implicit transaction anyway. I hate Ruby developers when they say, I will run this database migration without transaction. It's not possible, right? And this disable DDL transaction, it's wrong term. You cannot disable transactions in Postgres, but still this weird term it's used. So you need to open transaction, but you cannot open transaction if you don't open a session, right? So it's like one inside another. And the problem with transactions, long transactions, is that there are 2 problems. First is if you acquired some exclusive lock and keep it, it's always kept until the very end of transaction, either commit or rollback. So you need to stop, otherwise you're still keeping it. So it means you can block others. And second problem is auto vacuum. If you keep transaction open, even if it's read-only transaction, and sometimes even if it's on a replica, on a standby server, if hot standby feedback is on, it means that auto vacuum cannot delete freshly dead tuples, right? So we block some auto vacuum work, at least partially. But the first problem is the most it can be seen immediately if you keep long transaction, and you can have a storm of locking issues. So this means ideally transactions should be also below 1 second, right? Because
interesting, yeah.
Right? Because otherwise, imagine you acquire the lock in the very beginning of transaction, and someone also trying to acquire this lock. So you updated a row, and someone also tries to update the same row, and this happens in the beginning of your transaction. If you keep it longer than 1 second, you may block this session, this another guy, for longer than 1 second. So our previous topic will be broken as well, right? So this is a similar thing. That's why I always say when you split work into batches, try to find some batch size that will allow you not to exceed 1 second roughly. Exactly because of this. Right?
Awesome. So what? Going back to the folks that don't have much of this set up at all, what would you recommend them logging or monitoring for this? Yeah.
Well, every monitoring should have monitoring for long transactions, and I see most of monitoring fails to have it. Just fails. They don't have it. They don't report we open monitoring. And we cannot answer the simple question, what is the longest transaction? What's its duration right now? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 1 hour? we are interested in this. We don't discuss AutoVacuum and Xmin Horizon here. Just this simple question. And I think this is first step. You should have it in any monitoring. If it's missing, you should add it, and then you should have alerts again, like soft or hard alerts. Like if some transaction is running longer than 10 minutes, already not good. Like it's already a bad situation. Of course, sometimes you should exclude some transactions. So for example, vacuum can run longer. It will not. Usually it's not harmful. AutoVacuum also, right? So but regular transactions should be under control. In OLTP, we cannot allow somebody just to open transaction and keep it forever, right?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, you mentioned I know you're focusing on the first part of this, but the second part does feel worth mentioning in terms of avoiding transaction ID wraparound. Like, I know some small companies shouldn't get anywhere close to it, at least for a long time. But we've seen big companies over the last few years get tripped up by that, and feels like maybe they might not have been monitoring for this kind of thing, even at these large companies with massive scale.
Right. One of consequences of keeping transaction very long is you block AutoVacuum as well, and it cannot delete freshly dead tuples if you do it. Sometimes people open transaction and keep it for several days. Mm-hmm. If you're modifying queries or transactions are coming at very high rate, it can be a problem as well. But I observe usually already every monitoring has it. Like I'm less concerned here because I just see, for example, Datadog has it. Others also implemented it exactly because of this very painful experience from MailChimp and Sentry before, like several years ago. Sentry, yeah. Who else? Someone else also. It's good that those guys, by the way, blogged about it. It adds visibility. Yeah, blogging is very, very important. So, yeah. But I guess in my mind, I don't have a very good model for monitoring, ideal model, because we should distinguish various types of transactions, modifying which acquired log, and also they have real XSEDE, real transaction ID, or read-only transactions on standby, and like different things, right? So maybe we should have a couple of monitorings aimed to different purposes. One is for locking issues, another is for AutoVacuum issues. And AutoVacuum issues may be monitored differently, by the way. We can discuss different things, not transaction duration, but Xmin Horizon. And only then we care where it comes from our transaction on our primary, or from replication slot, or somehow else. So maybe we should have different things to monitoring charts, metrics, right?
Yeah. The other thing that interplays with this, that I think I've heard you speaking about before, are timeouts. So to protect against some of these.
Oh, yeah. I recently had one company. I unfortunately cannot tell the name, but quite already big startup, and they experienced a lot of issues because of lack of timeouts involved. And once again, we saw the problem that Postgres doesn't have a very important handle. Actually, somebody should develop it. Maybe I should develop it, but I'm not a hacker anymore. First, like what do we have? If we talk about like session, transaction, and query statement, so 3 levels, we can limit statement using statement timeout, but we cannot limit transaction. There is no such way in Postgres at all. That's it.
Can we do session timeouts?
Session, I think it's usually, if it comes through PG Bouncer, we can limit idle sessions, so we can say drop connection if it, like, I don't remember the concrete names out of top of my head, but I think this is possible, but session is less a problem, is not a big problem. Transaction, I would prefer to have a way to limit transaction duration, but there is no such way.
If we kill the session, that kills the transaction, right? But I guess
of course,
only if it's idle.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, there we go.
But like if transactions are small, session, for example, can be very long. I mean,
Yes.
you establish connection yesterday and continue working politely, like very small transaction, very brief. Why should we kill you, right? But if you open transaction, like we can limit statement and we can limit breaks between statements inside transaction. It's called idle transaction session timeout. Very long name. So we can limit statement, limit breaks, pauses between statements, and everyone should do it actually. I think any LTP should start with, like we had a discussion in Twitter some time ago, and I'm a big fan of global default, very limiting for LTP projects. Those who need it to extend, they can do it in session or for user. But in LTP, I prefer like to see statement timeout 30 seconds, idle transaction session timeout also like 30 seconds, sometimes even 15. Why? Because we discussed why actually.
Yeah.
But imagine a transaction which consists of like a chain of very small, very brief statements with small pauses between. You don't break any timeout settings in this case, and your transaction can last hours. And I saw it.
Yeah.
So
this
it's
is a
bad.
really
It's
important
bad.
point. Yeah, it seems actually potentially very tricky. But I guess when do you see people using multi-query transactions? So like let's say the Rails app that we were talking about.
Yeah.
What's their biggest risk in terms of long transactions?
Well, biggest risk with long transaction, we have two risks. Again, like locking issues, so you can block others and it can be very painful, and auto locking. So what I saw, people don't understand this simple idea that locks are released in the very end, and they split work into batches, but these batches are inside one transaction block. And it's awful. Like we perform small updates, everything is fine, but transaction lasts 1 hour, and those updates that were in the very beginning, locks associated with those updates are still held. So you have a lot of blocking concurrent queries, blocked concurrent queries, and those like victim queries. They can be, of course, can reach statement timeout and fail, so we see degradation. In best case, a statement timeout will save us to have a chain reaction, but it's still not good.
Reduces down.
That's why that's why I think by default in LTP transaction duration also should be limited. And I saw people implementing this on application side, which is of course like a weak implementation because you may have multiple application code parts, sometimes in different languages. So, and still somebody can connect using some tool and so on. So, like I would rather see it on Postgres side, but doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, and just to go back to something you said earlier, the times where you might need to override this. So if you set quite an aggressive one, let's say even if it's 30 seconds as a timeout, if we're doing a big data migration, or if we need to do a big schema change or add a large index during some downtime or something, we might need to set that. Yeah, okay, cool. Or even actually,
but
I'm guessing if we create an index permanently, it would still need a long. Would that be done in?
It's still. Yeah. You should do statement timeout set to 0, right? So, but there is another topic there. We probably should discuss it next time about log timeout setting. Log timeout. Let's keep it outside of today's discussion. Log timeout and retries. So yeah, exactly. This is a good point. Definitely.
Wonderful. I think we've done all right there.
What I like about it actually. Like sometimes people say we don't want to have timeout because it's painful, you reach it, you fail. Well, if you have 15 seconds and then you fail, you see it immediately. Then you said, like if you have 30 minutes, for example, and you fail after 30 minutes, damage already there, and you also like feedback loop is huge. This is painful, but small statement timeouts are not that painful. People see them. People adjust settings, go. That's it.
That's really I've not considered that. The smaller, actually, the less painful it is. Of course, the user doesn't see what they're expecting to see, and there's a problem. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a much smaller problem than you'd have had if it had been minutes or longer. Yeah, great point.
Right. Right. Small timeouts are good in terms of user experience.
Yeah.
Because it's like fail fast and adjust. That's it. Right.
Awesome. Is there anything
So-
else you wanted to cover on that one?
Maybe that's it for first
I think so.
pilot episode, right? Yeah. Let's see what people will tell us in Twitter, where we can get a feedback.
Yeah, Twitter would be great. I'll put some links in the show notes so you can find us. Yeah, please let us know
On
what
Twitter.
you think, what you want,
Right.
what you want to be discussed. Any questions you have, be really welcome. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Nikolai.
Good.
See you next week.
See you.